To this now, the South African government has made an urgent request to the International Court of Justice to consider whether the decision announced by Israel to extend its military operations in Rafah in southern Gaza requires that the court uses its power to prevent further breaches of the rights of Palestinians. Government says it is concerned on the attacks by Israel Defense Force in Rafah. It says this is the last place of refuge for people in Gaza. For more insight, we now bring in Patrick Kadima, an international law analyst from the University of the Witwatersrand. Thank you so much, Patrick, for your time this morning. So, the South African government through DIRCO has already conceded that Israel has essentially not abided by the ICJ's provisional measures, So in this latest incident, South Africa being back at the ICJ, just talk to us about the significance of this bid and if we will, in fact, see Israel conceding.
Good morning and good morning to your viewers. So we have now seen the latest additional request to the court by South Africa. And this latest additional request is simple. It is asking the court to intervene because it says that Israel's prime minister and the cabinet as a whole has said statements that they would be now going into the city of Rafah, which is the last, southernmost city in that area where people are now taking refuge, including citizens of Western countries that are there. Now, we did see before before the government requested before the government put this additional request before the court, that the prime ministers of New Zealand, Australia, and Canada released a joint statement asking Israel to heed counsel of its international friends and to not go into the city of Rafah, saying that that is the last place where civilians are taking refuge, including their own citizens, and asked the Israeli government to respect international law. Now, we have seen now South Africa taking this and even in its request telling the court that Israel's own friends have even told her that going into Rafah will be disastrous. Now, it puts the court in a certain challenging territory, if I may put it like that, because it's the first time the court will. In fact, what South Africa is asking is the court to act pro mutuo, which means that the court should act on its own terms in front of this request that has been put forward by South Africa. We did see previously that the International Court of Justice, as ruled before in Bosnia versus Serbia, when there was additional requests put forward, that the court just came in and made what some have termed a mistake to say that the court reaffirms its previous provisional measures. But now the court is here, South Africa here requests the court now to act on its own terms, and it might be difficult because this is the first time the court will have to go into such a decision, and it has once happened in the Germany, I think, versus the USA case, but in that case there was no original provisional measures that were ordered by the court. So this puts the court in a very difficult place, including the new International Court of Justice president that was elected when the new justices were being sworn in.
Patrick, I think you've mentioned a number of things. So just to go back to your example then of the reference to Bosnia and as well as Germany, and looking at the confines in which the court's parameters are. We know that the ICJ rulings are considered binding with no appeal provisions, but the court doesn't have the power to enforce its own decisions. So the question does still remain if this latest bid by South Africa, would be useful or at least help remedy the situation that you've also just highlighted in terms of what is happening on the ground in Gaza, particularly as it relates to Rafah border.
So yes, as you have correctly mentioned, the court does not have enforcement powers, and to a certain extent, this type of request also borders that, you understand. So whether it's going to have effect or not, we will have to wait and see how the court maneuvers this request. But what I can say, and what I would love to say is, international law is very complicated. It's not like any other, areas of law that we see in our day-to-day lives. This includes, here you have a principal organ, judicial organ of the United Nations that relies on the United Nations Security Council for enforcement. And with the United Nations Security Council, you continuously see that there are veto powers. Certain countries have veto powers to stop resolutions from being passed. So, but what we see now is that there is mounting pressure on Israel by her close friends. If you can see prime ministers from Australia, New Zealand, Canada, releasing joint statements asking their ally, to respect international law and so on and so forth, then you do see that there is mounting pressure on Israel to abide by the international law. So to see the effect of this, it might not play out that the United Nations Security Council might enforce it, but there is mounting pressure on Israel by her close allies.
So Israel has responded, and this response has been published on the ICJ's platform, responding, of course, to South Africa's urgent request for additional measures as it, speaks to Rafah. And I mean, they've given points in terms of what they think around this particular matter, saying, of course, that South Africa seeks to once again misuse the court's provisional measure procedure. They've also gone on to outline in terms of, how they have been observing and making sure that they do not, take in any more casualties. I mean, how much of Israel's response too will be considered by the court?
Yeah, so I did go through it briefly, and one of the things they even state in that response is that there has not been any change from the time the court gave the order, the provisional measures, but alternatively, it has been disputed by South Africa and other parties that about I think 2,800 civilians have died, between that period and so on and so forth. So I think the court now would have to, look at both, the request from South Africa and the response from Israel, and will have to weigh whether there is a need for a formal hearing. But as we have seen, South Africa has requested that there is no need for a formal hearing to happen, and that the court must, give additional provisional measures without requesting the parties to appear formally. And the court has the power to do that. There are provisions for the court to just look at the responses the request and the responses that have been given by both parties and decide there. So it is a challenging time for the court now, because South Africa has brought in this additional request. The court in terms of justices has changed. As we know, there are new justices that have come into the court. So it's going to probably be interesting to see how the court now deals with this new additional request.
I hear you when you say it's a challenging time for the court, but it's also a desperate situation for most Palestinians, and a lot of questions being raised in terms of what are we likely to see then at the Security Council, and that brings me to that question. I mean, do you think that the UN Security Council is going to do enough, to bring calm and peace in the area? We know, of course, that the US said if this matter is again brought in front of the Security Council, they may oppose it.
Yes, true. It's, it goes down to the talk about the reforms that need to happen in the United Nations Security Council that will not happen in the next year or two, or even in the next decade, but like I said, the United Nations Security Council is another thing, but we see how pressure is mounting on Israel. I mean, yesterday the African Union, who had given Israel observer status a few years back, refused indicated to its security services that you must not let Israeli diplomats enter the African Union building for the African Union summit. And you see, this is another type of pressure that's playing out. I mean, you see the African Union now taking a stand and saying they are going to support South Africa's case at the ICJ. And this decision by a regional organization such as the African Union is significant if one has to look at it from another view. So. The United Nations Security Council might continue not wanting to enforce the judgments of the court, but pressure is going to mount on Israel from other angles. And I think that it is time that, as you have seen the statement from those three prime ministers, that says that it needs to hit counsel from her friends, into not going into the city of Rafah.
Patrick, thank you so much for your time this morning. Patrick Kadima, an international law analyst from the University of the Witwatersrand.